When the suitcases were packed, I felt that this trip would be more than just another vacation. Nathan had been different in recent months. Fewer conversations, more work, and this distance between us grew heavier. His love for me was never in doubt, but it had become quiet, hidden under the layers of daily responsibilities. He used to make time for morning embraces and small gestures throughout the day. Now, the silence in our home felt stifling. Jenna, our daughter, grumbled as she reluctantly agreed to the trip. "It's just a few days, you'll enjoy it," Nathan had assured her. But pleasing a teenager was no easy feat. At 15, she already believed she was too grown up and far removed from us. Lost in her phone, she avoided conversations, mirroring her father. When Richard, Nathan's adoptive father, arrived, I tried to calm my nerves. Richard was always polite and caring, but there was something deeper in the way he looked at me. He helped load the luggage and remarked, "Ava, as always, you look stunning. That dress, it truly complements your elegance." I blushed slightly. Compliments always threw me off guard, especially ones so forward. On the road, Nathan barely took his ear off the phone. His voice was steady, but exhaustion seeped through. Jenna had her headphones on, staring out the window, completely detached from the moment. And I, sitting next to Richard, felt seen for the first time in a long while. His light jokes and stories about summers spent at the house we were headed to brought a warm smile to my face. "That house always reminded me of family," he said thoughtfully. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. When we stopped for a short break, I stepped out for some fresh air. Richard approached, his voice gentle. "You look tired. Is everything okay?" I nodded, trying to avoid his piercing gaze. His compliments were beginning to unsettle me, but I said nothing. Yet that first touch, a fleeting contact, crossing no boundaries but leaving a mark, lingered. The rest of the journey, I caught myself reacting too sharply to his attention. But being near him felt easier, lighter. Even then, I knew this trip would change us. The country house was just as I had imagined, old with wooden beams on the ceiling and a fireplace in the living room. It carried the scent of the past, a mix of dampness and the forest. The house needed care. The windows were dusty, cobwebs hung in the corners, and the garden was overrun with weeds. I immediately decided that cleaning would help me distract myself. Nathan, as usual, was busy. His laptop had already claimed a spot on the living room table. Jenna retreated to her room, slamming the door loudly. Only Richard stayed nearby, watching me intently. When I started dusting a shelf in one of the bedrooms, he walked in without knocking, holding a wastebasket. "Let me help, Ava," he said softly. But his voice carried more weight than a simple offer. I smiled to hide my discomfort and nodded. He took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and we worked side by side. His gaze lingered a little too long, his movements were a little too close. When his hand accidentally brushed mine, I felt my whole body tense. "You don't have to do this," he remarked, leaning slightly closer. I shrugged. "It helps me relax." He smirked as if my answer was amusing. "You bring life to this house, Ava. Everything feels better with you here." Dinner brought us all together at the old oak table. Nathan was engrossed in his phone, and Jenna picked at her salad in silence. The atmosphere grew tense when Richard spoke up. "Ava, you're a wonderful hostess. This house hasn't felt this warm in a long time." His words stirred a wave of embarrassment that I tried to hide by focusing on my glass. I noticed Jenna glance up, her gaze fixed on Richard. She clearly picked up on the tone of his compliment, and her eyes narrowed. I felt a pang of unease. Something invisible but palpable was happening between us at the table. That night, as the house settled into quiet, I tossed and turned in bed. Richard was right. I truly missed feeling valued. Nathan no longer looked at me the way he once did. His attention belonged to everything but me. And yet, I remembered a time when I felt desired. This house had uncovered cracks I was too afraid to confront. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. The house greeted me with the cold touch of wooden floors and the faint smell of dampness. I decided to make breakfast to distract myself from the restless thoughts that had haunted me through the night. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and crisp toast filled the kitchen. In that moment, I felt calm, as if all my worries had been left outside these walls. When the kitchen door opened, I turned to see Richard. He was dressed casually, his hair slightly tousled, his gaze warm. "Mornings suit you," he remarked, sitting down at the table. I smiled involuntarily but quickly looked back at the stove. His words sounded innocent, yet there was something in his tone that made me tense. "It's been a while since I've felt this comfortable," he added, leaning back in his chair. His compliments reminded me of the things I hadn't heard from Nathan in a long time. It seemed Richard noticed things that my husband had taken for granted. Later, we went for a boat ride. Nathan was busy with his phone, seated at the stern, while Jenna turned away, absorbed in her book. Richard sat next to me, and I felt his gaze on me. "You're a strong woman, Ava. I've always noticed that. It's remarkable how you manage to keep your warmth despite everything." "Despite what?" I turned to him, trying to mask my surprise. He smiled, shaking his head slightly. "Just an observation. You're not like the women I've known before. There's something profound about you." His words were soft, almost whispered, but they stirred a storm of emotions within me. I didn't know how to respond. These compliments were far too personal, and I found myself liking it more than I should. When we returned, I noticed Jenna watching us with narrowed eyes. Her gaze was sharp, assessing. She had clearly picked up on something. As I walked past her, she muttered, "You and Grandpa are spending a lot of time together." I froze, unsure how to respond. Jenna's words hit me like a blow to the back. There was a note of suspicion in her voice, and it unnerved me, but I simply smiled and kept walking, trying not to betray my feelings. I couldn't shake the oppressive feeling that I needed to get out of the house. Something inside me demanded silence, time alone. I threw on a light cardigan and walked to the lake, its surface shimmering like glass. Autumn was slowly claiming the landscape. The air was crisp. Leaves were turning crimson, falling into the water and creating ripples. Walking along the shore, I felt tension easing from my shoulders. Jenna's words from the previous day still echoed in my mind. What did she mean? Was it just teenage jealousy, or had she truly noticed something? I tried to brush the thoughts aside, but they clung to me like shadows. The sound of footsteps behind me broke my reverie. I turned to see Richard. "Do you often escape here?" he asked, approaching. I smiled, trying not to show my unease. "Sometimes I just need the quiet." He stopped beside me, hands in his pockets, eyes on the water. "You deserve more, Ava," he said, breaking the stillness. I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You deserve to be loved, to have someone who treasures every moment with you." His voice was soft, but his words struck me like a gong, reverberating inside me. "Richard, please," I began, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. But he didn't let me finish. His hand brushed mine, and before I could say anything, he pulled me closer. His lips touched mine, and I responded as if a part of me had been waiting for this moment. The warmth of his kiss was enveloping, tender yet filled with strength. Suddenly, realization hit me like a wave of icy water. I pulled away, covering my mouth with my hand. "No, this is wrong," I whispered, looking at him. Richard stepped back, his face calm, but regret flickered in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself." Footsteps sounded in the distance. I saw Jenna walking toward us, and my heart pounded in panic, fearing she had seen something. When she arrived, her face showed nothing but mild surprise. "You're both here?" she asked, her tone free of suspicion. "I was just taking a walk," I said quickly. Jenna shrugged. "All right, I'm heading back." I nodded silently, watching her leave. Guilt spread through me, mixed with a bitter sense of something else. I knew I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The morning began with an awkward silence. I came down to the kitchen later than usual, hoping to avoid Richard, but he was already there. His calm demeanor, as always, felt unnatural. His gaze met mine for a brief moment, too direct, too revealing. It reminded me of the previous day, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Nathan was already off attending to his work, leaving only Jenna at the table. She watched me closely as if trying to catch something invisible. That worried me the most. I tried to distract myself with routine tasks, but everything around reminded me of Richard. His shadow seemed to follow me, in every corner of the house, in every silent step. Even in solitude, his presence lingered in my thoughts, stirring conflicting emotions. The day dragged on. Jenna seemed more alert than ever. Her glances grew longer, more probing, as if she knew something but couldn't confirm it. It was starting to weigh on me. Late that evening, when the house was steeped in silence, I went down to the living room. I needed to distract myself, to grab a book or simply spend a moment alone. But Richard was there. He sat in the armchair by the fireplace, his face lit by the soft glow of the flames. A half-finished glass of wine rested on the table beside him, his posture strangely relaxed. I froze, unsure if I should turn back. But he had already seen me. His gaze held no surprise, no guilt, only a strange softness that unnerved me. I reached for the bookshelf, avoiding his eyes, but his presence was like a warm, oppressive air, impossible to ignore. I heard him exhale quietly as if he were about to speak but held back. The seconds stretched and I felt the tension growing. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just trying to avoid him but also myself. This house had become a trap where reality blurred with emotions I couldn't control. As I walked back upstairs, one thing was clear. This game with fire wouldn't end simply. The house had settled into its usual rhythm. Nathan disappeared each morning to handle his work. Jenna retreated into her teenage world, and I tried to regain balance through small household tasks. When Richard suggested we drive into town for groceries, I hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed. Staying alone in the house with Jenna, who continued to watch me closely, was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The drive to town was scenic, golden fields and sparse trees, their leaves beginning to fall. The car was filled with a strange silence. I stared out the window, trying to ignore his presence, but Richard eventually broke the quiet. He spoke about his past, about years spent chasing something that had been right in front of him, about the women who had been in his life. I always thought the most important things could be made up for later. But now I see how much I've let slip away, he said, his eyes fixed on the road. His words struck a chord. I felt he wasn't just speaking about his past but also about the present. His tone was calm, but there was a bitterness in it. We bought everything we needed, and on the way back a tire suddenly blew out. Richard pulled the car over to the side of the road and stepped out. "Stay in the car," he said, opening the trunk. I watched him from inside, feeling an inexplicable unease. A few minutes later, he opened my door, suggesting I step out to avoid being stuck inside. "It's not safe here," he said simply. Hesitantly, I reached out my hand and he helped me out. Our fingers brushed, and to my surprise, he didn't let go immediately. The moment lasted only a second, but it carried a warmth I couldn't explain. The drive back home was silent. I found myself realizing how strongly I was drawn to Richard. His words, his glances, even his gestures, they made me feel alive. At the same time, I knew I was walking a dangerous line. When we reached the house, I quickly got out of the car, avoiding his eyes. My heart was pounding, and the thoughts I'd tried to suppress demanded space. It was unbearable to feel this pull toward him and pretend it wasn't there. The early morning brought a chill that seeped through the slightly open kitchen windows. I was alone, enjoying the rare silence, when footsteps sounded behind me. I turned. It was Richard. His expression was serious, even tense, and as he stepped into the room, I felt that avoiding the inevitable conversation was no longer an option. He remained silent as I poured myself tea, but his presence was unbearably palpable. When I set my cup down, he spoke. "Ava, I can't hide this anymore. You mean more to me than I ever imagined." I froze. His words struck like thunder on a clear day, but what followed shook me even more. He stepped closer, and before I could say anything, his hands were on my shoulders, and his lips met mine. My first reaction was instinctive. I tried to push him away. But then a wave of emotion crashed over me, paralyzing me. That kiss. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing. It made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. I abruptly pulled back, breathing heavily. "No, Richard, we can't. This is wrong." He looked at me as if he saw my true self, and it was too much. I spent the entire day avoiding him. Every time we ended up in the same room, I found an excuse to leave. I even tried to spend more time with Nathan, hoping it would quiet the turmoil inside me. We had dinner together, just the two of us, for the first time in what felt like forever. I focused on him, on our family, but thoughts of Richard crept back, like a persistent whisper in my mind. Jenna started noticing the changes in me. Her sharp glances grew more pointed. Once I caught her watching Richard and me through the living room window. We weren't doing anything, just talking, but her gaze spoke louder than words. I felt the walls of the house closing in. The tension between Richard and me was becoming more tangible, and Jenna's suspicions were growing. That day convinced me of one thing. I had crossed a line. There was no going back. The night was warm, the air heavy with the scent of damp grass and late-blooming flowers. I was lying in bed when I heard a soft knock at the window. My heart froze, then quickened its pace. I already knew who it was. Rising, I quickly threw on a light robe that was closest to hand. Underneath, I wore nothing. It was late, and I hadn't expected to leave my room. Yet my feet carried me to the door. Richard waited by the gate. His figure blended with the shadows of the trees, but his eyes glinted in the darkness. He didn't speak, only motioned for me to follow. I didn't ask where we were going. Whenever he was near, reason seemed to take a back seat. We stopped at the old gazebo, nearly swallowed by the overgrowth of the garden. The wooden railing was mossy, and the roof creaked in the breeze. It was quiet here, as if the world held its breath, waiting for what would happen. "Why are you here, Richard?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. He turned to me, his face calm, but tension flickered in his eyes. "Because I can't leave things as they are. I've tried, but I can't." I sighed, hugging myself as if to shield against his words. "You know this is wrong. We're destroying everything." He cut me off, his voice sharper now. "But don't you feel it? Every time I look at you, I see a woman He trailed off, as if afraid to finish the thought. I stepped back, trying to keep some distance, but he followed. "Richard, we need to stop," I whispered. But even to myself, the words sounded unconvincing. In the next moment, he stepped closer, his hands gripping my waist, pulling me to him. I felt the warmth of his breath on my skin, and my resistance dissolved. Our lips met, and the world around us disappeared. This kiss was different, deep, consuming, as if we both knew there was no turning back. His fingers traced the curve of my back, and my robe slipped to the wooden floor of the gazebo. That night, it all happened quickly, without words, as if everything had already been decided. When we returned to the house, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving past the window. It was Jenna. She had seen us, her face betraying more than simple curiosity. My heart sank with the realization. She had seen Richard leaving the gazebo. Her suspicions were confirmed. I climbed the stairs, feeling the weight pressing on my chest. Guilt grew, mixing with a sense of helplessness. I knew I had done wrong, but stopping now seemed impossible. This moment had changed everything. That morning, the house was heavy with tension. Jenna was quiet, but her silence felt louder than any words. She looked at me as if she wanted to ask something but held back. Her coldness was becoming more noticeable. At breakfast, she was the last to join us, silently poured herself coffee and sat at the table. She avoided my gaze as though playing a silent game where I was expected to make the first move and admit guilt. I tried talking to her, suggesting we spend time together, but she gave only brief, uninterested replies. Her demeanor was different, guarded and suspicious, impossible to ignore. Each glance she sent my way felt piercing, as if she was searching my eyes for answers. Nathan, as always, left for work, and I decided to use his absence to reconnect with him. It had been a long time since we spent time alone, so I suggested a quiet dinner for two. I carefully planned the menu, decorated the table, and tried to recreate the warmth that seemed lost. When he came home, I greeted him with a smile, but he looked exhausted, barely noticing my efforts. We talked over dinner, but I found my mind wandering. Every gesture Nathan made, every word he spoke, reminded me of how I had betrayed him. But instead of guilt, something else stirred inside me. Memories of Richard and how I felt when I was with him. The thought terrified me. Jenna stayed in her room the entire time, but I knew she was watching. Later that evening, while I was clearing the table, she walked into the kitchen. "Dinner for two?" she asked, her tone a subtle challenge. I nodded, trying to stay calm. Your father and I haven't spent time together in a while." She scoffed as if my words carried a hidden meaning I wasn't aware of. "Don't you think you've been acting strange lately?" Her question was sharp, almost accusatory. I turned to her, but her expression was neutral. "Why do you say that?" I asked, trying to mask my unease. She shrugged and walked away, leaving me alone with the weight of her words. Jenna was smart, and her silence frightened me more than a direct confrontation. I realized her suspicions were real. She was watching, waiting for me to come clean. And I was sinking deeper into my contradictions, unsure of how to keep balance between the two worlds I was teetering on the edge of. The day began quietly, deceptively normal. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Richard walked in, his gaze lingering on me in a way I tried to ignore. Jenna was somewhere upstairs, and the house's silence felt unnervingly heavy. I knew Jenna was still watching, her behavior over the past days leaving no doubt, but I hadn't anticipated it would end like this. Later in the garden, while Nathan was away at a meeting, Richard approached me, his steps barely audible on the soft grass. "You're avoiding me," he said quietly, with no accusation in his tone, just a statement. I turned to him, holding pruning shears. "I'm trying to do what's right," I replied, avoiding his eyes. He stepped closer. "Sometimes the right thing is what makes us feel alive." His voice was low, almost a whisper. His hand brushed against mine, gently taking the shears from my grasp. I should have stopped him, but I didn't. There was something enveloping in his touch that I could no longer ignore. Before I could react, he wrapped his arms around me from behind, his hands sliding along my body. It was both terrifying and strangely warm. It happened too quickly for me to justify, even to myself. But Jenna saw it. I heard the crunch of her steps and pulled away abruptly, but it was too late. She stood at the garden's entrance, her face pale, her eyes filled with fury and disappointment. Without a word, she turned and left. Later that evening, Nathan walked into the house, his face grim. I knew immediately that Jenna had told him everything. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold as ice. We sat in the living room, the silence so thick it seemed to press against the walls. "Jenna said she saw you with Richard," he began. My heart pounded harder. I knew denying it was pointless. "It's not what you think," I started, but his glare stopped me. "Then what is it?" he demanded, his voice hard. I took a deep breath. We kissed. It was a mistake." I couldn't bring myself to confess more, his face contorted with pain. "Kissed?" he repeated, as if the word itself burned him. I tried to explain, but he raised a hand to silence me. "I don't want to hear it. I thought we were a family. I was wrong." He stood, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" I asked, already feeling him slipping away. "I need to think." "Without you," he replied without looking back. When the door slammed shut, I was left alone in a house that felt empty despite its walls. Disappointment, guilt, and fear crashed over me. I knew I had destroyed everything we had. The house was filled with silence, but it was a ringing silence. After Nathan left, everything felt different. Even the sunlight streaming through the curtains seemed alien, as if this house no longer belonged to me. All day I tried to find something to occupy myself, to avoid thinking, but my thoughts always returned to the same question. How had I let this happen? Later, when I went downstairs to the living room, there was an envelope on the table. The handwriting on it was unmistakable. Richard's. My hands trembled as I opened it. His words hit me like stones. "Ava, I'm leaving the house. I can't stay here, knowing I've destroyed your family. This isn't what I wanted. But I can't deny that what we had was real. Forgive me for everything. I hope you find a way to fix things. Richard." I clutched the letter and hot tears rolled down my cheeks. I didn't know what I felt. Anger, pain, guilt. Everything at once. His departure brought no relief, only an emptiness filled with the echo of his words. Jenna walked into the room unexpectedly, her steps firm, her gaze icy. She was no longer hiding behind silence. "He's gone?" she asked, but there was no surprise in her voice. I nodded, unable to speak. "Good," she said coldly. Then her face twisted in anger. "Do you realize what you've done? You've destroyed our family. Dad left because of you, because of your choices." Her words hit their mark. I knew she was right, but hearing it from my daughter was unbearable. "Jenna, I didn't mean," I began, but she cut me off. "You didn't mean? You knew exactly what you were doing and you let it happen." Her words left me standing in silence, my heart pounding in the void she left behind. She walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Later that evening, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window. Loneliness wrapped around me like a heavy fog. I tried to understand how I had ended up here, how I had let my insecurity and weakness destroy everything. My marriage, my family, even my daughter's respect. It was all gone, like sand slipping through my fingers. I was alone, and this loneliness was worse than any accusations. The house, which had been a symbol of stability for so many years, now felt foreign. It was no longer my sanctuary. I made the decision to leave. The pain of losing my family and the loneliness were unbearable, but what hurt most was Jenna's coldness. We packed in silence. Jenna wordlessly sorted through her books and clothes, tossing them into boxes with sharp, deliberate movements. Her gaze was blank, her face expressionless. "Jenna," I began cautiously, choosing my words carefully. "I know I've destroyed so much, but I want you to know, everything I'm doing now, I'm doing for us." She turned abruptly. "For us? You've already done enough for us," she said, her voice as sharp as ice. I didn't know how to respond. Every word I spoke seemed to fuel her anger. She didn't want to hear my explanations. To her, I was the reason for the destruction, and perhaps she was right. As we drove away, I looked back at the house one last time. Its windows stared at me like the eyes of an old friend I had betrayed. I sighed and got into the car. Jenna buried herself in her phone, ignoring me completely. Our new place was cramped and unfamiliar. The small apartment with gray walls and tiny windows could never replace our home, but for us, it was a chance to start over. A few days later, I found an envelope in my mail. The handwriting was familiar. Clutching the letter, I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Ava, I thought I could leave it all behind, but I can't stop thinking about you. You're a part of me, and that won't change. I hope you'll find the peace you deserve someday. Richard." Tears welled up again, but this time I didn't let them fall. I placed the letter in a drawer, unread a second time. I realized that clinging to the past would never allow me to rebuild myself. Richard was part of a story that had already ended. Now I needed to focus on myself and what I had to restore. Several months had passed. Everything that once felt familiar now seemed like a distant dream. Nathan hadn't tried to contact me, and from what I'd heard, he had started a new life. I learned that he had moved to another city, closer to work, and had even begun meeting new people. But I knew that beneath the outward appearance of calm lay something deeper. His resentment lived on, deeply rooted, like an old scar. I couldn't move on. Each day reminded me of what I had lost and how I had destroyed my own life. Jenna was still with me, but her coldness was an impenetrable wall. She only spoke to me when necessary, and her voice was devoid of emotion. I tried to reach her, to mend our bond, but every attempt fell flat. At some point, I realized I couldn't handle it on my own. I signed up for therapy. The first session was the hardest for me. Speaking my mistakes aloud felt like tearing open old wounds. My therapist, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, listened intently. She didn't judge, didn't interrupt. She just waited for me to let it all out. "Do you feel guilty because you couldn't meet expectations?" she asked one day. Her words struck a nerve. I had always tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I destroyed what I loved because of my own weakness. Therapy helped me untangle my emotions, slowly building bridges from the past to the present. I began to understand that my betrayal of Nathan wasn't just about my attraction to Richard, but also my escape from my own dissatisfaction. One evening, alone at my desk, I picked up a pen. The paper before me remained blank for a long time as I gathered my thoughts. Finally, I began to write. "Nathan, I know my letter might be unwelcome, but I want you to know, not a day goes by that I don't think about how I ruined everything. I can't bring back what we lost, but I hope that one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. You were everything to me, and I was too weak to appreciate it." The words flowed easily, as if I was freeing myself from something that had held me captive. But when I finished, something stopped me. I couldn't send the letter. It was for me, not for him. I folded it and tucked it into a drawer. It was my first step toward understanding. I couldn't undo the past, but I could learn to live with what had happened and strive to become better for myself and for those who were still here. The day was cool but sunny. Autumn had left its vibrant mark on the city streets. Golden and crimson leaves swirled in the air, settling on the sidewalks. I decided to visit a small cafe near my home. It had become a cozy refuge for me in recent weeks, a place where I could enjoy some quiet and a cup of hot tea. I sat by the window, watching as passers-by hurried about their day. Inside, the cafe had a calm atmosphere, which helped me feel more at ease. I had just placed my order when the door opened, and the jingle of the bell announced a new customer. My heart froze as I looked up. It was Nathan. He entered without glancing around, his movements as confident as I remembered. I watched as he walked to the counter, oblivious to the people around him. He looked calm, composed, even happy, like someone who had found a way to move forward. I sat still, unsure of what to do. My heart raced and memories flooded my mind. He turned, and for a brief moment his eyes met mine. Our gazes locked, but there was no recognition, no emotion in his look. He turned away as if I were a stranger. I hadn't expected this. When he got his order, he left the cafe without looking back. I watched him go, feeling something tighten inside me. But instead of pain, I felt a strange sense of relief. His departure showed me that he had managed to leave the past behind. Now it was my turn. I stood, leaving my tea unfinished. Stepping outside, I breathed in the cold air and felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. My past would stay where it belonged, in the past. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a journey I needed to take on my own. The world around me felt new, as if I were only now beginning to see it. I took my first step down the sidewalk, feeling that my life was just beginning.